All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to our daily Lunch and Learn. Decisions Lunch and Learn is a place Monday through Thursday at noon Eastern time that anyone is welcome to come in and ask any decisions questions. My name is Matt. I'm going to be the host for today. And if this is your first time here, the way this works is you can ask any question through the Zoom chat. You can raise your hand and we can unmute you, and I'll do my best to respond to your questions. Today we do have a pre-submitted question, and so I'm going to start with that. That question says, I'm using sub data buttons on a form. When those buttons are selected, a form displays for input, the data is provided, and that form closes. Then the main form closes. There is a delay between selecting the submit button on the sub data form and closing the main form. Is there a way to add the cycling symbol so the user knows it's working while waiting for the main form to close? That question is coming in from Jackie Thompson. And it sounds like this is having to do with forms and I think we call those Sub Dialog buttons. I'm assuming that's what we're referring to here. So the purpose is this one, once the Sub Dialog closes, then the main form closes. Jackie, I see you're on the call here. I'd like to ask a clarifying question, which is, how is it, what is the actual process that happens to close the main form once the user closes that Sub Dialog form? And either, let's see if we can get Jackie the ability to unmute herself, or if you'd rather, you can answer that question through the chat. Typically, the reason I'm asking that follow-up question here is because typically with a Sub Dialog button, it doesn't automatically close the parent form. I imagine you must have some process there to do that.
Right. So it is actually called a sub data flow button.
Gotcha.
And you can attach a flow, and then you bring back the results of the flow. The flow opens a form in this particular case. You populate that form, you hit submit, and then there's a place to, I think it's a flow. Let me just find it, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Since I did this, but it's a outcome rule where that will close once that sub data flow has completed.
Oh, I see. You have an outcome rule set up on the form to close that main form.
Yes.
I see. Okay. What is it that the rule is looking at? Is there some like input or I guess an output from that sub data flow that is passed into this rule?
So what it does is, one of the buttons, like there's a couple, but one is a send back. So what happens is you press the send back button, which sends it back to a prior assignment. And then it asks you, well, why are you sending it back? So you click on the reason it's being sent back, you add a comment, and then you hit submit. And once you hit submit, you return to the main form. And then this outcome rule, it also checks a checkbox so that the outcome rule can look at that checkbox. If that checkbox is checked, then it closes the form and routes it to wherever it's going. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. It does actually, yeah. It sounds like there's I'm assuming like some sort of hidden checkbox on the main form.
Yes.
Once that is flipped to true by the sub dialog, the outcome rule just exits the form.
Yes.
How long is the delay after that sub dialog form is closed?
Well, it's not huge, but it's about, I don't know, it's about 10 seconds. It's enough, 10 to 15 seconds. It's enough for the user to start clicking around thinking it's not working.
Oh, that is long. Yeah. Is there a lot happening in that sub dialog flow once they hit submit on the send back reason?
Not really, no. It's just you check this box for your reason, you select where you're sending it back to, and you're adding a bit of a comment. When it does return, though, the comments are returning to the main form comment section.
So, okay, yeah, the reason I'm asking that is because the outcome rule itself is probably not what's taking a while to execute. Although, what is the trigger that you're using to run that outcome rule?
The button, the main form button, send back or cancel.
Okay.
So that's the trigger to run that sub data flow.
Oh, I see. And then on the outcome rules, so there's also going to be a trigger to cause this rule. I guess the trigger would be, since you have a checkbox on there, I'm just going to put this on there and give it a quick data name.
So the outcome, there's not really a rule attached to it. It just, when that box is checked, you just tell it what, so cancel, hold on a second. Boolean, so value is true. So it's
Okay.
only looking to see if the value is true in the rule. And
so
if
it probably looks something like this, where the trigger is check, in your case, whatever the name is, but value changed of that checkbox.
Okay, so it's you, yeah. It doesn't quite look the same to me. Like there's no, I do have a trigger, and that's the checkbox being checked, but the rule is just a generic is value or is value Boolean checked is true.
Gotcha. Okay, I think I'm understanding the overall setup that you have, and based off of that, yeah, I think that the delay, that 10 to 15 second delay you're talking about, is occurring in the sub dialog flow itself.
Okay.
Which version of decisions are you using?
6.15.
Got it. Okay, so overall, this form designer is going to look a little different when you're using it. This is version 7, and so what is you're using a let's see. Gotta look for it. A sub dialog button. You have some button like this that pops up the your sub form, that sub dialog form.
So yeah, no. So it's a sub data flow, and
sub
you're
data.
saying,
am I correct in saying that when you click the button, another form pops up over top of the parent form, like on the main form?
Yeah. So it'll, when you click it, it pops open with a new form.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that is what this button is for, this sub dialog button. In version 7, it's called legacy, but this is probably what you have in your flow. What I would suggest you could possibly do is in your sub dialog flow. Let me just create one so we have a visual to look at. You've got your sub dialog flow. It displays your form where the user can select the reason for sending back. And then some things occur here.
Yeah.
They store the comment. You mentioned they pick the reason, and that's sent to the database at this point, right?
Yes.
One thing you could do is, I imagine it's those things that's happening after the form, but before we get to the end step in the sub dialog that's taking the time. I'm not sure about like directly, your question is, could we have some sort of cycling symbol, like, just indicating that it's processing and waiting. I don't know that that's necessarily possible, but one thing that I'm thinking might be possible is to just speed up that delay. And so they don't have to wait that long. One way to do that would be to take all of the steps that happen after the form and are saving the comment and everything and put those into a subflow and run that subflow asynchronously. That would be something I would try, because what happens then is, let me pull out an async subflow wrapper step. What happens with these kinds of flows is once it hits this subflow step, it'll immediately go down the done path. And everything that happens inside of there happens on another thread. It happens in parallel to what's happening outside of there. And what that means is it's immediately going to go to the done step and send the user back to the parent form. And in the background, it's going to save all the information that they entered in on that sub dialog form. So essentially, it's going to eliminate that wait time, but it will still save that data to the database, just in the background. That may be one way to resolve that wait time and not necessarily even need the spinning delay form. Does that make sense what I'm talking about here?
So yeah, I totally get the async and all that. What I'm not understanding, or what I'm trying to sort out in my head, is this flow actually brings in all the comments that are on the main form and replaces them with a new string of comments, which is the existing comments plus the new comments from the send back. So it returns that to the form as well. So what you're saying here, and I don't have actually a save step in this subflow, in this, so it comes out and it saves after it leaves the form.
Oh, it saves after it leaves the main form. Okay.
Right. And so that kind of wouldn't work in this particular case, because then I'd lose those comments.
I see what you're saying. Okay, and so this pattern, may work, but it does represent a pretty big change to how you currently have the flow designed.
Right.
To me, the strangest thing is that 10 to 15 second wait. It sounds like based off what you said there, there's got to be some sort of text merge to concatenate the previous comments with the new comments, and I cannot think of any reason that would take 10 seconds. Is there anything else happening, at this point in the flow that is maybe atypical or typically you've seen take a long time?
So not really, no, because the only thing I can think of is there's a word wrap, which is a subflow, and the word wrap just kind of formats the comments to display correctly on the form. But that's really all I can, because all I have is a create step, which is creating the new comment with the reason, and then I'm just removing any unwanted spaces and then wrapping that, formatting that those comments for the form, and then just mapping it into where I need it, like mapping it correctly back into feedback into the form as comments, like as the comments section of the form. So I don't know. It doesn't really, to me, look like it's really labor intensive, that it should be causing such a delay.
Yeah, to me, that's the main issue. There's not any way that I know of to show that waiting indicator. I'm just going to take another quick look through here on the properties, but if there was a way to do that, I think it would be done on this properties panel. What I would suggest is, since on this lunch and learn, I don't have any way of viewing your actual flow. I'd love to have someone on our support team get eyes on what that flow is and actually address that 10-second delay and see if that could be reduced. So what I suggest is if you could submit a support ticket and ask if you can get help with why is this simple text merge taking 15, up to 15 seconds. I imagine they may be able to figure out a way to just cut down on that time to the point where you wouldn't even need a spinning dialogue.
Right. Okay. All right. I will do that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. We do have another question coming in from the question and answer box, and I'm going to answer this one now. This is the question says, I'm new to decisions and trying to learn and create some sample flows and forms and see if this platform is better suited for my future upcoming projects. So how feasible is this platform to build a UI? What are the integration possibilities? That's a good question. So what we're actually currently looking at here from the last question is the form designer. This is what we use to design all of the decisions forms. It's a drag and drop designer. It's also what you see is what you get, meaning when this form actually executes in flow, exactly as you designed it is what shows up. So for example, this is just a preview, but I've got this checkbox here, and that's how it was in the designer. I've got the Sub Dialog button there. That's what's shown to the user. The designer does have a pretty good amount of flexibility, and you are constrained to the controls that we have here, except there is the ability to enhance these designers by using a JavaScript control. So if you did find, if you had some need for a control that doesn't exist, they can be created through JavaScript. Another part of this question is, what are the integration possibilities? So there's two possibilities. Let's say you want to integrate, if you want to use a decisions form embedded in another website, that is certainly possible. The way that works is you'd put this form into a flow. That flow essentially becomes an API that you could call in an iframe or something like that, and it'll render this form embedded in some other website. And you get the decisions flow functionality in the back end, as well as you can design these forms easily through the form designer. On the other hand, you may want to create a headless flow that doesn't have any decisions forms. For one reason or the other, you may want to design a form in a more traditional way or some other software. In that case, you could build a flow that accepts inputs for what you expect to do. And then your external form can call that flow as an API and trigger that flow to run with whatever inputs were on that form. So as far as integrations go, we have a pretty high degree of flexibility, whether you want to use decisions forms embedded in another website, or if you don't want to use decisions forms, you can still use flows, rules, things like that, integrated with some external UI. I hope that answers your question. Please let me know if you have any follow-up questions, either in the chat or in that question and answer box, and I'd be happy to address any of those specific questions. All right, I don't have any other questions in the question and answer box or in the chat at this time. Okay, I did see a follow-up come in though. And the question says, can we export an entire project created in Decisions to C# project, kind of to edit outside and maintain in bitbucket? The answer to that question is I don't think so. If a project is created in Decisions, there's no way to just kind of export that into a C# it doesn't like translate a flow into a C# code. You can certainly integrate with other .NET applications, but that direct export isn't something that is possible. But as far as custom coding, that is something that would be possible. There's a number of avenues to make that happen. I mentioned earlier, on the form side of things, you could use a JavaScript control, which gives you the ability to just design your own form controls. If you want to use .NET to create a step, that's something that's possible, a step in a flow. To do that, you can use our SDK, which is gives you the ability to create custom steps in a flow, custom rule verbs. Many of the components and decisions could be customized or enhanced or have additions added to them, like, for example, steps using that SDK. In addition, I think another route to that would be through integrations. And I was mentioning earlier that these flows, rules, forms all have easy ways to generate APIs, and you could call flow using a REST service. That's another way to integrate with some sort of custom code as well. I think that's probably the more popular route to use REST integrations to integrate with proprietary software or other custom code. But again, SDK is also an option for altering decisions. As a kind of tool for learning more about that, we have our documentation site. Let me just do a search for SDK. I think we have some articles that talk about the SDK, and this would be a good way to start learning about what that would look like and how we would be able to modify decisions through there. We also have a section on integrations, and I think that these two places would be a good way to understand, the different ways decisions can interact with other custom software or other software in general. I'm going to just take this link and paste it into the Zoom chat so that you have that more accessible. And another follow-up question, how do we pull data from the database to bind to dropdowns and save to database? Is it possible for my projects that have forms to connect to MS SQL database and fetch data and validate forms kind? Yes. To populate a dropdown, there would be a lot of ways to do that. It depends on what that database integration looks like, but we do definitely have the ability to integrate with a SQL database. As an example, okay, so let's just drag a dropdown onto this form. I'm going to get rid of these other components that I created earlier. When you drag a dropdown, the way this works is you select the type of object that dropdown is displaying. In this case, I'm going to go with a string because that's a simple type of dropdown to talk about. And that I'm going to select this list input source to come from a data name. And that's important because this means that when I use this form in a flow, that form step is going to have an input for what the dropdown selections should be. I'm going to save this form, and I'm going to create a flow. Just going to call it form test flow, and I'm going to drag that form I just created into this flow. So I'm going to grab a show form step, and I'm going to tell this form step to show. I'm going to pick the existing form that I just created. It should be under recent. I call it sub data flow, but that's an old name now, but it does get the form in there. All right, I've got this little orange icon, and that's telling me that I need to supply some input or otherwise configure this form to work in the flow. To do that, I've got this list of inputs. The dropdown selection is what I want to have currently selected from that dropdown. I'm going to set that to ignore, and that basically is telling the form to allow the user to select that. And then dropdown selection. So this is where that sort of integration with a database or whatever you want can happen. So at this point, the form will have nothing in the dropdowns, but easiest thing I can do is set that to a constant list and say, you know, I've got option 1, option 2, option 3. If I run the form like that, it's going to have exactly what I just typed in there because it's a constant input. Every time I show the form, it's going to have 1, 2, and 3. But what you could do here to have this dropdown get populated from a database, first thing is to set up a database integration. Once that database integration is set up, you can use a number of steps to pull data from that database. I won't get into those specific steps, but there's a lot of ways you can either run a SQL query against that. You could have a saved, like a stored procedure that pulls back those options. Pretty much however you can think of pulling data from that database, you could do that. You'll have a step in the flow that'll pull that data in and pass that data into this form input, and therefore that dropdown is going to be populated from information from that database. After the form to write data back, same story. You have a database integration, and you could use like a query step that allows you to insert data into that database, or however you want that to behave. But bottom line is that comes down to a database integration, and all of that information could be found on this doc site. I would search maybe database integration. I think something should come up. External database integration. This would be an excellent document to read through to understand what that integration looks like and how to pull data from this database into a form and then into a flow and pass that into a form. Okay. I hope that answers your question. Of course, feel free to ask any further questions, or if you prefer, you can raise your hand and come off of mute. I don't see any other follow-up questions or hands raised. If you do have any questions or want to talk about something, this would be a great time to raise that hand or send questions through the chat. I'm going to pause here for a few seconds to allow folks to have that time to answer or to ask any questions they might have. I don't see any other questions coming in. We are about 30 minutes past the hour. I'm going to go over a few things, and then if I don't have any questions at the end of that, I'm probably gonna end it there. So please feel free, raise your hands, ask any questions. One thing that I like to do on these lunch and learns, I typically show up here on usually every other Thursday. We don't have a perfectly set schedule, but one of the things I've been doing is if there aren't questions, I go through and I'm trying to build out a calculator in decisions. I'm building it from scratch. That idea came from as a training exercise for new hires. We used to have them as their first project build out a very simple calculator using a form and a flow. I decided I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to use that as an example to build a project from scratch. So I wanted to build a very simple calculator, but I wanted it to be modeled very similarly after my favorite childhood calculator, which is the TI 108. So that's what I've been doing on some previous lunch and learns. I typically, like I said, I'm on Thursdays. If I don't have questions, I like to go through and continue working on this project. So far, I've got a few buttons on my calculator. I figured out how to get the display working. Turns out that this calculator it looks very simple, but there's a lot going on in the background. It's actually been really fun to think about how this is actually processing data and how I can make this essentially simulate this behavior on a decisions form. Its current state is looking a little rough, but I've been building this out slowly but surely. So far, I've had 2 lunch and learns where I've worked on it, and currently that form looks like this. I have the 1 button. When I click that, it populates the 1 over there. I don't think I have 2. Oh, I do have 2 set up. So I've got these buttons. I've got my plus, and I don't have my equals button yet, so I can't really demonstrate that yet. But this is where I'm going to continue if I don't have any questions on a lunch and learn for Thursdays. I don't see any other questions for today. I don't have time to get into that calculator project, but if you are interested, feel free to hop on these lunch and learns again. Come in on Thursday. I might be there to talk more about that. Thank you, everybody, for joining Lunch and Learn. I hope everybody has a good rest of their week and has a good weekend. I hope to see you all again on another Lunch and Learn in the future. Have a happy Thursday, everybody.